Hello, my friends, and welcome to 7 Black-Eyed Kid Stories via Thought Catalog. The phenomenon of the black-eyed children is nothing new. They're children with jet black eyes that invoke a terrible sense of fear and dread. Many stories of encounters with them appear to be more and more frequent as time progresses. Urban legend or terrifying entity? You decide. Here's 7 true encounters from various users across the internet. It almost felt like a dream. I woke up to my dog, Lucy, barking. She was upright on the bed where my husband and I were sleeping with our 22-month-old daughter, staring at her door like an unknown stranger was out there rummaging around. I thought that she was just freaking out over a house noise. We'd only had her for 3 months, and she was still a puppy. It could have been anything. A roommate, a creak from the house settling, the awning moving outside in the breeze. I wasn't too concerned initially. I decided the best bet would be to open the door and show her nothing was there. Sounds a bit silly, but that's what we do with our daughter when she gets scared, and I figured it would work with the puppy too. I opened the door and she raced to the front door. She stood there, snarling at the door. It was an angry, violent growl, one that I had never heard her make before. I looked groggily at her and opened the baby gate blocking the doorway, planning to open the door and show her everything was okay. The second my hand reached for the deadbolt, Lucy went wild. She started barking and jumping towards me, and when I touched the metal, she suddenly changed her temper. She whimpered, almost like she was afraid, and backing down. As her mannerism changed, so did mine. I wasn't calm anymore. My heart was racing and sinking at the same time. I'd been flooded with a mixture of fear and dread. I looked through the peephole. I can't explain why I looked, but I did. Outside were 2 kids. One was just a smidgen shorter than me and didn't look much younger. I'm 21 and she looked to be 16 or 17. She was slender and pale. Her hair was a long, light shade of honey blonde, about mid-back, with long, thin, blunt bangs in the front that seemed to cover most of her eyes. She wore jeans, a light wash that's popular right now, and a thin-looking, olive-colored, pullover-styled hoodie. She held the hand of a small girl, who looked to be around 3 or 4, in the same style jeans and a button-down ivory cardigan. The smaller one looked at the floor shyly. She had the same shade of hair, tied back in a ponytail. She held a stuffed toy under her free arm. It was identical to the one my daughter has, as was their style of dress. Had it not been for the feeling of overwhelming dread and fear, I probably would have asked these children to come in and have some tea or hot chocolate to get them out of the bitter cold. But something about them seemed off. At this point, I hadn't made any noise. I hadn't shushed the dog or grumbled. Nothing. I hadn't turned on any lights. These kids had no indicators that I was at the door. The older one spoke. She had a voice that was mature, confident, strong, and accentless. She held her head tilted downward, and I couldn't see her eyes. She said, "We have to use your phone." I stood frozen in fear. How did she know I was there? She raised her head to face me directly, and that's when I saw her eyes. There was a reason I couldn't see them through her bangs before. They were black, or a midnight blue, or a dark, dark purple. They were otherworldly. She said, "Our mother is worried." As someone who's always been interested in creepy stories, I knew what she was the second she looked at me through that door. I've never been one to believe in these things. As a staunch atheist and skeptic when it comes to the paranormal, I had written off many ghost stories from friends and family members eager to tell me their tale. I didn't believe it. Still, I couldn't rationalize my way out of this. I was standing with nothing but a thin wooden door between me and a black-eyed kid. There is no questioning what was right in front of me. I did not answer her. Slowly and silently, I backed away from the door. Lucy still cowering at my ankles. She kept talking. "Just let us in to use your phone." I took another step back, and with that step, the tone changed. At first she seemed polite. When I took that second step back, she became commanding, almost hostile. "We're not going to hurt you. If we wanted to do that, we would have broken in." "I'll ask again. May we come in and use your phone?" Lucy snarled at the door and I inched backwards, though something inside me seemed to be slowly pulling me back towards the door. It wasn't a physical pulling so much as a subconscious need to go back and let them in. I got to my room, covered the window, locked the door, and sat there in the dim light of the nightlight. I heard her call back to me from the door once more, and then it went quiet. I didn't go back to sleep that night, and I haven't slept right ever since. I know from reading about them that the black-eyed kids can't just come in without permission. I know they haven't hurt anyone, but I still fear that I'll be the exception. When I told my husband, he said it was just a dream. He keeps telling me to forget it. But this lingering feeling of sadness, this dread when the house is silent at night, this fear of a knock at the door, it tells me otherwise. Last night was just like any other night. I was switching between listening to music and watching YouTube videos, with one headphone in so I can hear my infant daughter. She cries. That way my wife can get a full night's sleep. She works at 4 a.m. at the hospital every day. Then I decided to go lay down in the spare bed in the baby's room. Just as I had dozed off, I heard a thumping noise from the front porch. It startled me at first, and I opened my eyes wide to scan the room. Realizing it was most likely my cat scratching himself on the front porch, I dozed back off. Then again, the thumping. Darn cat. Got out of bed to run him off the porch, only to see he wasn't there anymore. Now that I was up again, I wasn't the least bit tired. I'd figured I'd get some tea and check Facebook while I'm up. Maybe finish the web series I was trying to watch on YouTube. A few minutes into the video, I felt a sudden urge to look up at the kitchen window. There they were. The tops of two short-statured people's heads cresting the stars just above my window frame. The people were just short enough not to see in the window, but I could see out. I heard no footsteps on my porch as my stomach turned. But the knock was a steady, hollow thump. The very same thump I had just blamed on my cat. Deciding it was best not to answer, I shut my laptop, and I crept by the door back to the baby's room. I assumed it was some of the people from the low-income housing across the road from me that were high or hiding from the cops, or maybe looking for my cousin, who stays with me often and has many friends over there. The last thing I needed was to try to explain to two stoners that I was trying to sleep, even though it was 2 a.m. It wasn't until I got into my daughter's room that the creepiness set in. The thump had moved from the kitchen to the bedroom windows. Both windows, a room apart, thumping in perfect time. These stoners were going to wake up my daughter if I didn't run them off. Now angry, I went out to the kitchen, unlocked and opened the door, ready to run around to the side of the house and kick some little idiots. It happened then, standing there, looking up at me were 2 10 or 11-year-old boys. The feeling of dread and the smell of mold almost made me vomit. The smaller one of them spoke. "May we use your telegraph?" Huh? I just stared blankly at these boys, horrified of what I realized. Their eyes were pitch black. He asked again to use my telegraph. There wasn't a sound to be heard. No crickets chirping. No dogs barking. No cars driving by. Nothing. I tried to play it cool and ignore the fact that he didn't say telephone or phone or cell or anything that would have made any sense of the situation, and calmly replied, "I don't have service at my house, sorry." The expression on their faces turned to rage as I finished my sentence. Swiftly, I shut the door and locked it as quickly as I could, then stumbled back to protect my daughter. I picked her up from her crib and I held her close. The fact that she didn't wake up freaked me out, but I managed to gather my senses enough to make sure that she was still breathing and warm, and everything seemed okay with her. The thumping on the windows was back. I dropped to the floor as close to the wall as I could, and I held my little girl in my arms, and I wept like a child. I felt helpless and afraid. I lied there for what felt like hours and hours, crying and shaking, until I heard it. My wife's alarm clock. The thumping stopped the instant the alarm went off, and I crept into the master bedroom with the baby. "What's wrong with you?" my wife asked. "I just had a bad dream," is all I could mutter out. "Okay, well, give me the baby so I can feed her before work." I handed my wife the baby, and she fed her like any normal day. I turned on every light in the house and made coffee for her. For some reason, just having her awake calmed my nerves enough to pretend like nothing happened. I walked her out to her car nervously with the baby in my arms. I asked her not to leave until I walked back into the house. She was put off by the request, but did so to humor me. Once I was safely in the house, I locked the door again. And in the house, I sat horrified until she got home. I insisted we go to the next town over and stay the weekend at my brother's house. And here I sit horrified while she sleeps in the guest room with my daughter, wondering why they stopped when the alarm went off. I think I know the answer. I was aware of those black-eyed kids, and she wasn't. Every story I've read about them is from someone who's already knew about them. Maybe, just maybe knowledge of them existing is the only reason they visit. I'm afraid, and I'm sorry. The incident took place about 13 years ago. I just moved to a new city with my wife. We were small-town newlyweds from the Midwest. We moved across the country to one of the biggest cities in the Southwest so I could attend a graduate school. Being naive and new to city living, I habitually answered the door without a second thought. Never again after this. The first thing that should have tipped me off to the peculiarity of the situation was the fact that someone was knocking at 6 a.m. in the morning. The second thing that should have dawned on me is this kid had to reach over a rather tall patio gate to unlatch and open it. The knock at the door was startling. My wife and I were getting ready for work, a pretty normal routine. The moment I opened the door, I was overtaken with an inexplicable sense of fear. To this day, I can picture him. A teenager, average height, average build, knee-length black leather coat, short black hair, and sunglasses. The sunglasses at 6 a.m. struck me as odd, and even more odd, he was eating an apple. He was very polite and asked if he could come in and warm up. I said no, closed the door, and slid the security chain into place. A moment later, another knock. I opened the now chained door, and before I could speak, he asked again if he could come in and warm up. "No!" I reply, and attempted to close the door. Before the door could shut, he put his hand out, stopping the door on its hinges. He looked directly into my eyes, still wearing his sunglasses, and said, "Can I at least get some ketchup for my apple?" "No," I reply, albeit a little confused. "Get out of here! My wife is calling the police." He takes a moment to let this information sink in, lowering his glasses, revealing eyes, black as obsidian, and says, "No, You won't be calling anybody." At that moment, I force the door closed, lock it, and call out to my wife. She's scared and hiding in the bedroom. I'm all jacked up on adrenaline, so I rip the curtains back to look out the window next door. He's already gone. Absolutely no trace of him. I go out to the patio and check the gate. It's still latched from the inside. This is so messed up, I think to myself. And as I turn to enter the house, I notice a half-eaten apple lying on the ground. I'd be lying if I told you I didn't know about the black-eyed kids before this happened to me, late summer last year. I definitely did. Now, in this moment, that idea never crossed my mind, but afterward, it did. And the thought leads to all kinds of regret. I realize it's stupid, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you about my neighborhood. I live in a poor part of town, big ghetto, bit of the barrio, bit of the lower economic class of cross-section of races. It's LA. The apartment complex spans a short block. It's dusty brown like the desert we live in. It's got 2 pools, lots of little Mexican children, and for the most part, a pretty friendly population. I'm a destitute writer trying to make it in Hollywood, so I spend my free time writing. When this happened, I was working mostly in the mornings and afternoons. I would get home, hit the gym, and then settle in for an evening in front of the computer. It's pretty common for the evenings in the summer to be chaotic around the apartment complex. Kids playing in the pool, the ice cream man pushing his cart up and down the sidewalk, women talking outside the laundry room. Hey, I do my own laundry, but I am pretty much the only guy I see in there doing it. You know. Nice, low income but pleasant. Like a mixed-race 21st century version of a 50s sitcom. And, people will knock on your door, sometimes trying to borrow something. I cook, so neighbors pop by to find out the origins of the great aromas wafting from my kitchen window. Sometimes for a little help working on a broken car, but mostly it's kids selling candy bars or Christmas wrapping paper, or jittery tweakers selling magazine subscriptions, or old Mexican men selling bootleg DVDs, and a lot of Jehovah's Witnesses. Because it's hot out, I leave my windows open. AC isn't cheap, and I've got no money, remember? And I open it hoping for a cross breeze. That means, though, I can't see anyone from where I sit and work, but I can hear them very clearly as they walk up to my door. When I hear someone knock, I answer it. Besides buying the occasional candy bar, I smile, politely decline, wish them a nice day, and send them off. No big deal. That evening it was quiet, which was strange in and of itself. I should at least have been able to hear the distant sounds of the ranchero music. I heard a couple of people walk up to my door. I'm not the first apartment in my courtyard, so I usually hear the salespeople as they knock on my neighbors' doors and work their way up to mine. But not this time. Whoever it was walked right up to my door and knocked. I got up to answer it, reaching for the door handle, when a chill went through my body like I've never experienced. A cold tightness in my chest. I halted my hand movement towards the door handle and I placed it flat on the door as if I was feeling heat from a fire. I have a peephole on my door, but it had never crossed my mind to use it before. I stood there with my hand flat on the door and I listened. They knock again. I don't scare easy, and I wasn't exactly afraid, but I was having a visceral experience all over my body, a base fear reaction. Just like I could hear them, they heard me move to the door. They knew I was inside. "Yes," I said. "Who is it?" A boy's voice answered. "We need to use your phone." "Yeah, that's not gonna happen." I started laughing. I just laugh when I'm in pain or under pressure. They heard me laughing, and neither of us moved for about a minute or two. A really, really long minute or two. Finally, they walked away, not to any of the other of the 8 doorways within 15 feet. Not to ask anyone else. Before they could have gone more than a dozen yards, curiosity reasserted itself, and I yanked the door open, running after them to see who it was and where they were headed. The courtyard of my complex was completely empty. Afterwards, I thought of the experience and felt it fit the stories about the black-eyed kids, and I kicked myself for not opening the door. Coming face to face with black-eyed kids? How cool would have that been? But then I remember that feeling, my skin crawling, and the certain knowledge of me at that moment. There is no way I would ever open that door at that time. It was a cold October evening, not too far off from Halloween. I remember sitting in my room, playing the original Suidoken. The evening was slowly creeping by, so I decided to go to the corner store. It was only about 3 blocks. Shouldn't be much trouble, right? During my walk, I see the normal. The occasional person putting up Halloween decorations, and the kids playing in their yards. But this story is about something far more sinister. I remember seeing 2 teens about the age of 14 knocking on a door, asking to use the phone, which of course I thought was weird because most teens these days have phones. As I kept walking, they stopped and stared at me for a short moment. I felt the blood in my veins chill. I felt so creeped out that I hurried to the next block. The next block seemed fine until I looked behind me and I saw the 2 teens were following me. I took off sprinting to the store at this point. I saw the sign for the store and relief washed over me. I opened the door and I told the cashier about what happened on the way here. He looked at me slightly creeped out, and he told me a story about this happening to him in his hometown, and how they found him the day he left, and asked for his help in an emotionless voice. He told me to never agree to help. He told me another story, but at this point I was no longer paying attention, because they were standing at the door, asking to be let in. The cashier freaked out and locked the door. The teens never seemed to waver or leave. They couldn't step away from the door. It had been an hour. The cashier and I were ready to fight our way out, but instead he took me out back. The one teen came around the back, just as the door shut behind us. "Can you help me?" is all he could say. He was closing in on us, and his eyes, they were black as a starless night. They were peering right into my soul. I couldn't help but gaze into his eyes. The terror, I can't remember too much of what happened next, but I do recall the sounds of a struggle. When I came to, the cashier was struggling with both teens. He was calling out to me for help. I ran towards them, grabbed them by the collar, and pulled them between the 2, knocking them over in the process. I didn't look back until I was near my house. The cashier was gone, but the teens were still following behind. I ran into my house, closed all the blinds, and turned the music up. I got lucky the next day, but I'm not sure how long I can keep out of their grasp. I tried to find that cashier and thank him for saving my life that day, but he didn't show up to work after that. I asked his boss, and he told me that he had called over the phone and quit. He said he was moving. To this very day, I sometimes feel the fear of those eyes watching me as I drive to work. Let me tell you a little bit about myself. I'm in my early 20s. I just moved into this apartment, and I tend to live a very private life. I don't even have a Facebook account. I work during the day at a grocery store. Okay, so I'm walking up my flights of steps to get to my apartment, and I hear these kids laughing, and then I hear them whispering. It was kind of late, so I thought this was weird, but I ignored it, and I walked into my apartment. I live on the 3rd floor. I was getting ready to open my balcony door. It was really muggy in my apartment. I walk over to the door, and I pull my blinds, and 2 kids are staring back at me. I screamed and backed away, and smashed my leg into the table. They were both in blue jeans, and the oldest, he was taller, had on a green shirt with white stripes, and the younger had on a button-up light blue shirt. The oldest one touched the sliding door. "Hey, miss, can you let us in?" The younger one just kept looking around. I still just stared at them. Finally, I was able to say, "How did you get on my balcony?" I walked to the door and noticed how excited the older one got. He moved closer to the entrance. "Can you let us in?" I wasn't thinking. I unlocked the door, and when I looked up, their eyes were black. The entire eye. I quickly locked the door, and I told them that I had to call the police because my door was jammed and I couldn't unlock the door. So I called the police. The oldest boy pleaded with me the entire time to let him in. The police arrived about an hour ago. They came in and walked to the balcony. When they opened my balcony door, nothing was there. They looked down and saw 2 children. They were running away in the parking lot, far from the building. The police took a report and said they had to have a lot of help getting up there, and that they would question the neighbors. I'm still freaking out. I'm crying. I don't want to stay here, but then again, I also don't feel safe going outside right now. Reading these stories, I've always been a skeptic. Stories, alleged first-hand experiences, hauntings, possessions. They're all well and good for a quick chill, a cheap thrill. Something I read to get my heart rate up. Getting scared can be fun sometimes, as long as you don't overdo it. Just a little something silly to get worked up about. In my lurking in books and on numerous sites on the internet, credible or not, I've come across many a story or accounts about ghosts, demons, the Jersey Devil, you name it. Recently, I have found my way into stories about the black-eyed kids. No, these kids didn't get a black eye from a fight. I don't believe there would be a soul out there with the backbone to try and attack these kids. No, the black-eyed kids are kids. If that's not straightforward enough, usually, from all the accounts I have read, they are in their teenage years. If they even physically age at all. Their eyes are pitch black. No pupils, no corneas, no white showing at all. Pitch black. They have olive skin and wear run-of-the-mill clothing, as in hoodies. However, in a non-physical sense, they always bring with them an overwhelming sense of fear and dread. They are intriguing, and when approached by them, again from all the accounts I've come across, it's like you're in a slight hypnosis, though you usually snap out of it when your instincts takes over, usually as you meet their eyes. Then there are theories about what these black-eyed kids may be. These theories range from lost souls to alien-human hybrids, and even vampires, though the latter may be an extreme stretch to link the black-eyed kids to current social infrastructure of vampires found commonly in young persons. In light of this, I've always been a very fact-based person. If its existence was not apparent, or the existence of the thing in question was not testable and verifiable to me, it did not exist. However, one night, one long, terrifying night, which still haunts me to this very day, showed me the proof required to open my eyes and mind. My story begins when I left my mom's house. I'd gone over to visit her because my father, her husband of 63 years, recently passed away, and Mom wasn't doing too well. I knew she needed support from her loved ones, and I was more than willing to go visit her and keep her company. But it was getting late. My mom lives in the suburbs. Tidy lawns, plenty of neighbors, paved roads. And even though it was near 11 p.m. when I left, the streets were extremely well lit by the street lights, who always had your safety and ease of mind at heart. These lights only lit the road, though, and glancing across the street, the houses were cast in an eerie shadow. Even as a rather safe, charming little neighborhood, it can seem a little spooky and uninviting when cast in shadow. I admit I was a little bit chilled. Sliding into my car, I revved the engine and I waved to my mother, who was standing in the doorway, wrapped comfortably in a warm shawl. She waved back, her old and fragile arms shaking. I saw her mouth, "Be careful," and I smiled, backing out of the driveway. I turned out of the neighborhood, deciding to take the back way, the shorter way home tonight. In hindsight, that might not have been a good idea. I live a significant ways away out in the middle of the country in the old farmhouse I grew up in, which my father had left in my name when he and my mom had moved out, into a place smaller, more easy to care for, and affordable, and social. My father, had always told me growing up, don't go out at night, and always beware the devils. He was a strong believer in anything and everything paranormal, a very superstitious man, and I always had to resist the urge to laugh at his words. But I knew he meant well. Driving down the dark country roads, there were no street lights, and the half-paved roads were cracked and filled with potholes. The fields on either side of the road were empty, just blank stretches of overgrown grass and untended shrubbery. The dark outline of the trees of the woods could be seen looming all the way across the fields on the shadowy horizon. One might have even seen a deer or two once in a while in those fields, but not tonight. The moon offered little light, as the sky rolled with dark, threatening clouds, ready to burst with rain or a storm at any moment. Sure enough, a few moments later, the low grumble of thunder sounded, heavy and long. However, no rain fell just yet, much to my pleasure. I hate driving at night and in the rain, and putting those two together would end badly. I just knew it. Accompanied only by the occasional roll of thunder, I started to feel a bit anxious. I can't explain it, I just felt shaken up. Probably because it was night and it could start raining. Or maybe I had been reading too many ghost stories and legends, and tonight seemed to reflect the mood of the stories that I read almost obsessively. To try and calm myself, I flicked on my old car's radio and turned the old-fashioned knob back and forth, slowing down a bit as I attempted to find a station that came in clearly. Nothing doing. Weird. There was a broadcasting tower right near here that usually came in perfectly, clear as day. But still nothing. The white noise and static of the blank stations was doing nothing to appease my anxiety. I gripped the steering wheel tightly as more thunder boomed from the sky. Aggravated, I forcefully shut off the radio, gritting my teeth. Glancing down at my dashboard, I noticed I was nearly out of gas. Groaning, I searched the road for a sign for gas. As I was scanning the side of the road, I noticed from the corner of my eyes 2 figures walking on the side of the road, shrouded in shadow. They were walking slowly. One turned around, walking backwards, his or her thumb sticking out. I felt compelled to pull over and give him a ride, and I found my hand turning the wheel slightly, but I pulled back, realizing how stupid it would be for me to accept two random strangers into my car in the middle of the night on a backcountry road. I sped up and past them, trying not to look at them as I did so, though I felt oddly intrigued by them. As I focused on the road ahead, it started drizzling, dropping my mood another level or two. Along with the rain, the thunder seemed louder and closer as the storm moved in. A few seconds passed until I gave in to my compulsion to look at the two figures, and I glanced in my rearview mirror. It seemed as if the two were walking faster, and the one no longer had his thumb out. But it had to be my imagination. How would I be able to tell if they were walking faster or not? It was rainy and dark. Looking back at the road, I almost missed a sign that alerted me of a gas stop up ahead. A sigh of relief passed my lips, and I slowed down, looking for any indication of the stop, pushing the thought of the two figures from my head. Soon I was pulling into the gas station slowly as the rain started to pick up. The store was closed, but luckily they had a 24-hour gas pump service. That was good for me, because if they had not, I'd have run out in a few more miles down the road. I shut off my car and hesitantly shuffled out of the metal shell and glanced over my shoulder, still not being able to shake that nervous feeling that had manifested inside of me earlier that night. I stood under the light of the overhang, trying to figure out how to work the pump, which seemed so overcomplicated in the dim light, and with my mind not being able to focus on the simple task. The rain picked up more, heavier and louder against the concrete of the gas stop as I was finally able to get the pump into my car, forcing my hand to stop it shaking. I had this horrible feeling that my shaking wasn't just because of the bitterly cold night air. Suddenly, the overhang lights of the gas stop started flickering wildly, a couple going out altogether. It seemed as if the temperature dropped 20 degrees in a few seconds as I glanced around. A sinking feeling started to blossom in my stomach. As if in slow motion, I turned around, facing back towards the road, the long, lonely road, and saw what I expected to see there. But even as much as I knew what I'd see, I still felt the drop of my stomach, the color draining from my face, as I breathed a sharp, cold breath forcefully as it almost caught my throat. Across the street, the two figures were standing, facing me. They started crossing the street slowly but surely, and I fumbled with a gas pump. It had only been a few moments, but it seemed as if the gas pump was taking its precious time. I was shaking hard now as the thunder boomed once more, and I looked back up. The figures were now at the entrance to the gas stop, and my breath was quick and shallow. I blindly shoved the pump back into its holder, not being able to tear my eyes away from the figures. As they drew closer, I became more frantic, even though, now as they walked into the flickering light of the overhang, I saw that they were just two teenagers. They looked ragged and frigid and soaked from the rain. I straightened up a bit, still terrified, but another compulsive feeling similar to the one I experienced in the car was bubbling, and I felt obligated to talk to these two, though I insisted myself to just drive away, to not risk anything. They were extremely close now, at the next pump when I slid into my car, shaking wildly, and fumbled for my keys, cursing myself as I dropped them to the floor. Leaning down, I swiped them up and sat back up. A cold, sickening feeling came as I saw them, face to face with one of the teens. He had his hand on my window, knocking slowly but forcefully. I rolled down the window a bit, just a bit, no bigger than to allow maybe a small child's hand through, Before I spoke, he spoke first, the other figure standing in the background. Still, I could see something of a grin on their pale faces. "Can you give us a ride into town? We missed the bus and don't have a ride." He spoke slow, and something about his voice made me shiver. A cold chill swept down my spine and I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. Clearing my throat, I glanced at the dashboard and at the keys in my hand. I'm sorry, but I'm not going into town," I stuttered, keeping my eyes down, not at the kid. However, the teenager knocked harsher and made me jump a little as he insisted another time for a ride. I told him no once more and looked up, trying to seem intimidating, which seemed silly, trying to seem intimidating to a child. But a horrible, chilling sight greeted me. I looked the kid right in the eyes and gasped sharply, my back hitting the seat as I went to back away. He had eyes, oh he did, but they were blacker than the night, pitch black. No discernible pupils, no white whatsoever showing. Pure black, deep, brooding, and surprisingly intriguing. But my fear got the better of me, and I quickly turned the key, and my engine revved to life. I thanked God, which I had never ever done before tonight. Thank God my car had not stalled, and I went to pull away, and the kid banged on the window with a pale fist, screaming for a ride. I took off speedily down the road, apologizing to my father again and again that I had laughed at him, that I never took his warning seriously. After a few more minutes, I pulled into my driveway and right into my lawn in front of my porch. I didn't want to spend any more time outside than I had already had, and I jumped from the car, leaving its door open, and I ran inside, slamming my house door and locking it, even going as far as to put the chain in the front door in case something or someone tried to get in. Sinking into the chair in the front door, I shivered uncontrollably and started to cry, hiding my face in my hands, as two dark figures stood at the end of my driveway. That's all the time I have for today, my friends. I hope you're having a wonderful day or evening. I'm Amori. Now, listen to the spooky tunes. Hello, my friends, and welcome to my mic's so far away. Come closer, microphone. Yes. Yes, just like that. The tops of two short-statured people's heads cresting the stars just above my window frame. The people were just short enough not to see into the window, but I could miss blah 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 blah. Let me tell you a bit about myself. I'm in my early 20s. I just moved into this apartment, and I tend to live a pretty quiet... Yep, that's correct. That's all the time I... Perfect.